Welcome, Adam.
Hey, Nick. How's it going, dude?
Amazing. I'm really excited to be talking about this topic, which is trade schools.
Yes.
I think there's a whole world there.
There is so much to unpack on trade schools, and I know what you may be thinking. You may be thinking we're going to talk about, just welding and over-the-road truck driving and those kind of trade schools. We are going to talk about those, but not only those. There are so many different kinds of trade schools out there today. Our last episode was all about career exploration.
Yep.
And this idea that people are trying to figure out what it is they want to do for a living that also fires them up. And I think there's this misnomer that, well, if I don't love what I do, I'll just go back to school and then I'll find what I want to do back at school, which generally means that people go another $30 or $40 or $60,000 in debt, which just isn't necessary. So we're going to talk about trade schools today.
Cool. Yeah, let's talk about the shift in how education is actually happening. So, at least for me, I went to Santa Clara University. It was a private institution. 4 years all in was about $200,000.
Wow.
And if I look at what I am doing now, which is coaching people around their relationship to money, and speaking professionally at different colleges and at coffee shops and all of that, I would definitely attribute a lot of my current situation to what I've gotten from Santa Clara. But if we're talking about the technical aspect of what I learned in that education, it is not very translatable.
Right.
So, beep boop, beep boop, beep boop.
All good.
Or just gonna wait for it to pass.
Oh, sure. 1.5 trillion in student loans.
Okay. I'm kind of leaning to you on this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I will.
Okay. Okay, so we cut that.
Start from your experience.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, the conversation around trade schools is particularly interesting to me because if I look back at my college experience, I spent 4 years at Santa Clara University, and all in for all 4 years was $200,000.
Eesh.
And so, unfortunately I had scholarships and grants and, definitely had to take out loans. But if I looked at the things that I actually learned from all of the classes, I would probably say I apply 10% of those. Doing what I do now, a lot of what I learned was on the job.
Sure.
From mentors like yourself and other people and, YouTube, right?
Right.
And different online courses. So the landscape of education is definitely shifting and it's changing.
It will change, no doubt. And I think some of those changes are going to be around virtual reality. I want you to imagine at some point in the very near future, your kids won't actually go to a college course. They might sit down on the couch and strap on an Oculus VR lens, right? And sit in a virtual classroom with their friends and look around and check out some of the avatars sitting around them. It won't be a traditional classroom, which will mean that the actual needing of buildings and campuses and all those things will begin to change over time.
Yep.
Here's why that's important. Right now, currently, there's $1.5 trillion in student loans in our country outstanding.
That's crazy.
Which is a staggering number.
Yeah.
It's predicted to double to $3 trillion by the year 2025.
Huh.
So if you imagine $3 trillion in loans out there to students graduates like yourself, that $200,000 number may pale in comparison to what some other people may have.
Yeah.
Which I think is going to change the educational offerings and all of that. One of the big changes that's happened around education has to do with companies today. And you were mentioning there's a bunch of companies that have done away with their degree requirements.
Yeah, a lot of the companies, particularly in the Silicon Valley, I would say, it's kind of home for innovation, like Google, Apple, off the top of my head, I think Ernst & Young, Starbucks, Home Depot, Hilton, there's a lot of different companies that are no longer requiring degrees. And so for me, it begs the question, okay, so then what is the purpose of a degree?
Right.
And what am I actually getting, the return on investment? And does a trade school, would that suffice for what it is that I need?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those not in the know, a trade school is a little bit different from a university or a traditional college program in that it is hands-on learning. You're actually getting paid while you learn how to do the job. So as an example, you go to a trade school to become a welder, a framer, a sheet metal worker, a mason, but also things like doing telecommunications and working on telecom and wiring switches and all those kinds of things. There are coding trade schools where you can go and learn how to program and do code. And in fact, I've talked to a number of people who work in Silicon Valley who've said, we actually don't like hiring people straight out of an MIS program, a management information system. They would rather hire them out of a coding program because by the time they get through 4 years of MIS, the programs and the code that they're writing in is outdated. Whereas the trade school graduates have been hands-on working on it 6 months, 9 months, 18 months later, they're out in the field working already. So it's kind of interesting, the shift there. When you're in a trade school, you become an apprentice to a journeyman or to a master. And I think it's really interesting in the context of our podcast, the Mastery Podcast, that you start out as a journeyman, you start out as an apprentice to a journeyman, someone who's been on the journey for a long time. And you learn from that journeyman or that master how to do the craft. The interesting thing about trade schools that we found out when I was a part of the documentary Broke, Busted, and Disgusted is that when you lay out the math side by side of someone who goes to a college and spends $25,000, $30,000 a year, or $50,000 or $60,000 a year in tuition, next to someone who goes through an apprentice program and gets paid year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and as soon as they're out and they are effectively a journeyman, they're making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. And so when you look at it side by side, the investment in becoming, going from apprentice to journeyman is actually could be a better investment than actually going through a 4-year degree program and coming out making $40,000 or $45,000 a year.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Yeah,
Yes.
it definitely has shifted my relationship to traditional education. How I even see my kid, like my future kids, if I want them to go to college, if YouTube and trade schools and boot camps are suffice. And it'll be really interesting to see, especially in this pursuit of mastery, with the shifting landscape. So what does mastery actually mean?
Right.
And I, in our first episode, I created what mastery means to me, which is, it's a mountain with no top. And I think even to kind of further on that analogy is kind of like there are multiple mountains you need to be a part of or could be a part of.
No doubt.
So it's pretty interesting.
Well, I think it also highlights the ease at which you can pursue mastery in something when you're young or before you go into college.
Yeah.
Because there's so much out there online that you can learn ahead of time.
Yeah.
You mentioned kids, your future kids. For my kids, one of the things that I've talked to them about is a program that's not too far from where we live that is 3 trimesters. So it's, I believe it's 18 months long. And it costs about $15,000 or $16,000 to go through it, but it is an optics program. And the optics program offered by this local community college, the graduates of this program are getting 6 to 8 different job offers before they're done with their program. Each of them being offered somewhere between $80,000 and $90,000 a year.
Wow.
In things like advanced manufacturing and research. And effectively what they're doing is learning how to calibrate lasers in order to do advanced manufacturing and such. So my thought is this: we can either send kids to a 4-year school at $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, have them take on massive amounts of debt, or we can encourage them to go check out a trade school route, go through the school program for 18 months or 2 years, come out making $40,000 or $50,000 or $60,000 a year, work for a year or two, which would put them around 20, 21. And by that point in time, if they have done money decisions well, then they could theoretically pay cash for the remainder of a 4-year degree, which would be about 2 more years. So we need to begin shifting and changing how we think about education over time. And hopefully we've given you a few things to think about.
Yeah. We'll definitely be curious to hear your thoughts on the traditional education, if it works, if it doesn't work, if it's inefficient or it could be more efficient, and also what your thoughts on trade schools and this conversation Adam and I have created. So drop a comment below, and we're definitely excited to engage in this dialogue.
Particularly if you've been through a trade school. Like
Yeah.
if you have gone from apprentice through journeyman status and you're watching this, comment below and let us know your path. We'd love to have you as part of the community. So thanks for tuning in.
See you next time, tomorrow.
See you next time tomorrow.